They asserted that nobody would lend credence to his narrative. But on this day, standing before a presiding justice, Kendrick Stokes was no longer suppressing his voice. The atmosphere within the judicial chamber was imbued with the commonplace. Documents being shuffled, writing implements scratching against legal pads, and the subdued drone of legal representatives exchanging final pronouncements permeated the atmosphere, the kind of day when anticipation for anything unusual was negligible, merely another juvenile defendant, another regulatory protocol, another adolescent adrift within the system. Subsequently, Kendrick Stokes articulated, "The law enforcement personnel assaulted me." His tone remained unwavering, yet the verbiage reverberated like a physical blow. The articulation reverberated throughout the courtroom, much like a lacerating blade. An interval of complete quiescence ensued, so pronounced that even the ambient hum emanating from the overhead illuminations appeared attenuated. Judge Marianne Dunham remained immobile, her gavel positioned proximal to her fingertips. The aforementioned judicial figure was renowned for her pragmatic disposition, a judge who seldom manifested reactions to impulsive outbursts. But this particular occurrence deviated from the norm, her ocular organs fixated upon Kendrick, scrutinizing his physiognomy, discerning something within his countenance that the legal framework frequently neglected to acknowledge: anguish, trepidation, and something else: resolve. Seated across the expanse of the chamber, Officer Brent Callowell, the very individual responsible for apprehending Kendrick, shifted in his designated space. His jawline tensed, his visual organs flitted momentarily, yet he refrained from vocalizing any utterance. The counsel for the defense, a distinguished-appearing gentleman boasting streaks of silver at his cranium, leaned forward, his labial structures parting perhaps to lodge an objection, or possibly to dismiss Kendrick's assertions as simply another forlorn maneuver undertaken by a terrified adolescent. Nevertheless, he hesitated. Kendrick was not exhibiting lacrimation, neither was he stammering. He was maintaining direct ocular contact with the judge. At the prosecution's table, Assistant District Attorney Dana Hollowell deposited her pen in a manner that was not gentle but deliberate, an indicator that, for the initial juncture throughout the duration of this case, she was extending genuine consideration. Kendrick's legal guardian, Miss Bernice Lowry, stiffened while stationed proximal to him. She had instructed him to remain reticent, averring that it was more secure to permit the legal representatives to manage all proceedings, and that speaking aloud might exacerbate matters. However, she was currently grasping the periphery of her chair, her inhalation held taut within her thoracic cavity. "Kendrick," Judge Donahue enunciated, her tone even, "reiterate your declaration." Kendrick swallowed, his diminutive appendages clenching into clenched formations upon the time-worn wooden surface. His phalangeal articulations were blanching, his tonal projection did not vacillate. "The law enforcement personnel assaulted me." Somewhere within the rearward segment of the chamber, a court officer cleared his larynx. The oral manifestation registered as unnaturally amplified amidst the prevailing silence. The judicial figure cast a quick glance toward the prosecuting side. "Miss Hollowell, was this particular detail integrated within the reports?" The Assistant District Attorney compressed her lips. She had perused Kendrick's file. A routine arrest report, nebulous on specificities, devoid of any extraordinary detail. Nevertheless, she was now perceiving the adolescent in an altered light. The contusion positioned just inferior to his clavicular bone, scarcely discernible beneath his excessively commodious formal shirt. The manner in which his shoulders constricted, as if anticipating an admonishment to cease verbalizing. There existed no notation pertaining to the utilization of excessive coercion. "Your Honor," she formally expressed. Judge Dunham then redirected her attention to Kendrick. "You are asserting that the apprehending officers employed coercion against you?" Kendrick rendered an affirmative gesture. Consequently, his gaze flitted, if only momentarily, toward Officer Callow. Callow shifted once again. Judge Dunham registered the movement, and so too did Kendrick. "I am asserting," Kendrick verbalized, his tone now attenuated, yet still unequivocally discernible, that they wished to impede me from discoursing regarding the occurrence. The degree of stress within the atmosphere underwent further amplification. Nobody mobilized, nobody dared. The counsel for the defense ultimately regained possession of his verbal faculties. "Objection, Your Honor." "Overruled," the judicial figure instantly proclaimed, her ocular organs steadfastly affixed upon Kendrick. Some faculty urged her to believe that this represented merely the genesis. What Kendrick was about to express, however, would engender universal alteration. Kendrick exhaled with deliberation. His phalanges exerted such force upon the table's edge that they ached intensely. He understood what followed. The portion where the mature population endeavored to distort his expressions, where they instilled within him a sensation of derangement, akin to inventing the entire scenario. But he was not inventing scenarios. His ocular organs gravitated toward the judge. Her visual organs fixated upon him, awaiting. She had not yet dismissed him. That constituted progress. Kendrick inhaled, and he revisited the evening of the incident. The hour had grown protracted, excessively protracted for an adolescent to remain at liberty. Yet he was not engaging in illicit behavior. He had been residing at the domicile of his peer, DeAndre, merely a duo of blocks distant from his personal residence. They had been partaking in the consumption of electronic diversion, the form in which temporal duration dissipates precipitously. Before he could register the passage of time, the thoroughfare illuminations hummed and the pedestrian pavements were vacant. He availed himself of the abbreviated passageway homeward, a familiar trajectory. He scarcely traversed midway through the designated alley when illuminated scarlet and azure emanations flashed posterior to him. A law enforcement motor vehicle decelerated to a crawl and subsequently halted. Kendrick petrified. He understood the manner in which this scenario presented itself. An adolescent wandering in solitude, appendages ensconced within the apertures of his hooded garment, at the precise moment in the nocturnal cycle that warranted suspicion. A duo of law enforcement representatives alighted from the vehicle. One, Callow, the other, Riley Denton. The latter stood taller, boasted a more protracted life cycle, and manifested the propensity to limit his verbal expressions, yet invariably maintained his manual extremity proximal to his duty belt. Kendrick extracted his appendages from their ensconcement without delay, his phalanges splayed in a non-threatening posture. "Greetings, adolescent," Callowell articulated, as if they constituted familiar acquaintances. "From whence are you proceeding?" "Residence," Kendrick uttered, providing a falsehood. He wished to refrain from delineating details. He wished to refrain from naming his peer. He wished to avert becoming the catalyst precipitating a delayed nocturnal visitation upon the progenitor of another individual. Callowell did not manifest indicators of having been persuaded. "What contents are concealed within your storage compartments, devoid of any possessions? Would you be amenable to permitting a visual inspection?" Kendrick hesitated. He was cognizant of his legal prerogatives to a certain extent. He comprehended that he could render a denial. However, rendering a denial never truly connoted an absence of subsequent action when the interactions involved entities akin to these individuals. Nevertheless, he executed a rearward ambulation. "I have perpetrated no wrongful action." Denton emitted an exhalation of frustration, oscillating his cranium in a manner that signified disapproval. "Witnessed, I harbor no affection for the conduct," he verbalized, as if Kendrick had intentionally insulted him. "I harbor no predilection for the manner in which they enact those roles." Kendrick's pulse accelerated. Callowell's countenance darkened ominously. "Do you entertain the notion that we are situated in this location solely to subject you to unnecessary harassment?" "No," Kendrick promptly retorted, his response, however, registered as inconsequential. Before he could manifest a reaction, Cowell grasped his carpal region with forceful intent. Fear discharged throughout Kendrick's central nervous system. He twisted reflexively, striving to extricate his personage. Cowell's grasp, though, merely intensified. Now you are presenting physical opposition. I am devoid of such intention. Thereupon, Denton propelled him against the wall. The frigid brick rasped against Kendrick's epidermis, with the appendage exerted forceful pressure against the rearward portion of his cranium. He ingested an inspiration, his cardiac organ hammered. I have perpetrated no impropriety. Kendrick gasped. Cease resisting. Resisting what? A fist propelled directly toward his costal structures with forceful intent. Ache detonated within his lateral expanse, and Kendrick's genuflections gave out. The respired atmosphere vacated his respiratory organs in a singular, acute expulsion. They were no longer soliciting information, they were imparting an educational paradigm. The forceful impacts were neither uncontrolled nor random. They were scrupulously deliberated, sufficient to inflict distress, yet insufficient to yield discernible excoriations where their visibility possessed pertinence. Thereupon, with identical swiftness, the event culminated. Callowell rectified his respiration. Even Denton rectified his belt. You are fortunate that we maintain an upbeat emotional condition this evening, Callowell muttered. Subsequently, the restraining instruments clicked closed, surrounding Kendrick's carpal regions. He entertained a paucity of certitude concerning the precise imputations that impelled his apprehension. Such specifics registered as inconsequential. When the conveyance drew away from the curb, Kendrick was possessed of one unquestionable conviction. Nobody would extend credence to his assertions. Now, ensconced within the courtroom, there existed no recourse for anything save attentiveness. Kendrick's verbal expressions diminished, and the courtroom still resonated with the sensation of holding its breath. He perceived the attenuated rasping of the stenographer's digital input devices and the distant hum of external thoroughfare movement. Interior to this chamber, however, every ocular orb was directed toward him. Judge Dunham drummed her phalangeal articulations against her desk's surface. She reflected that she had witnessed an abundance of cases throughout her tenure. She'd seen adolescents providing falsehoods in an endeavor to extricate themselves, adolescents communicating partial truths because they were assailed by trepidation. Kendrick, however, was not stammering, nor was he scrambling for expressions. He was recalling occurrences. The prosecuting attorney Dinah Hollowell folded her appendages and repositioned her fixation from Kendrick towards Officer Calloway. She had processed cases akin to this, and she'd perused formal communication that did not reconcile or reflect the presence of any physical injury. Patrol recording devices somehow malfunctioned precisely as incidents reached their acme. Some law enforcement officials held authority akin to weaponry. That, however, did not suggest that she was in the position to merely accept the assertions of an adolescent over that of an officer. An interval of quiescence extended. Callowell cleared his larynx. "Your Honor," he verbalized, projecting a tone that was measured and regulated. "This delineation is completely bereft of veracity." His legal counsel, a middle-aged male clad in a navy-hued ensemble, offered an affirmative gesture. "Judge, we cannot sanction the perpetration of unbridled imputations akin to this instance. Assuming the adolescent experienced mistreatment, why did he withhold communication before this session?" The expressions registered akin to slaps to his physiology, yet Kendrick remained immobile. He understood the inclination of the impending pronouncements. He understood that this constituted the mechanics of the scenario. The individuals perpetrating circumstances akin to the aforementioned invariably presumed that adolescents analogous to him would continue to remain silent. Kendrick was finished remaining reticent. "Are you asserting that he fabricated his depiction?" Judge Dunham queried, maintaining close visual monitoring of Callowell. "I assert there is no communication pertaining to an incident of excessive application of coercion," Callowell retorted with fluid ease, "and I deem it peculiar that he is merely explicating this now." Kendrick's carpal extremities curled while contained within the sheathing of his garments. Of course, no formal communication prevailed. "Do you require an explanation?" Kendrick interjected, his vocal manifestation unwavering, although his thoracic cavity resonated with constrictive tension. For it was communicated to me that none would lend credence to my declarations. Cowell's countenance barely morphed. We did not communicate such expressions. Kendrick, though, did not even peer toward his physical form, his visual sense organs connected with the judge. "Before they ensconced me within the automotive conveyance," he articulated, "they impressed upon me that I was at liberty to utter any expression within my repertoire, and ultimately my verbal expressions would register as inconsequential when juxtaposed with their collective testimony." Callowell's legal counsel emitted a restrained cachinnation, oscillating his cranium negatively. "Your Honor, this scenario is escalating towards the realm of the absurd. We cannot merely—" "Did you procure formal communication for this instance, Kendrick?" Hollowell interjected. Kendrick hesitated. "I lacked comprehensive understanding," he admitted, "and regardless, who was I to formally explicate the account? The law enforcement personnel." The chamber registered quiescent once more, Cowell's jawline constrictive, his manual extremities flexed against his thighs. He restrained his personage in a state of composure. Hollowell exhaled gradually. Her ocular organs transited toward Judge Dunham. "Your Honor," she requested, "I necessitate acquisition for the entirety of the material captured by recording devices integrated into the garments of on-duty personnel from the evening that Kendrick's apprehension transpired." Kendrick's abdominal region clenched. The footage. He maintained no comprehension of the specifics that had been captured. He maintained no cognition concerning the activation status of the integrated recording devices, or whether there had been any fortuitous cessation of function, the sort of occurrence that has validity on frequent occasions. What he did possess, although, was a deep-seated knowing that such a piece of film, if to be absent from existence, was to hold a narrative far more illustrative than any verbalized account. Judge Dunham offered a singular affirming oscillation. "Request acknowledged." Kendrick inhaled minutely. He registered the cognition that Calloway bore his visual attention. Such a thing was beyond reading, calculating too. Regardless of the material that transpired, the pieces of media in question, absent of content or otherwise, bore nothing less than what would ensue and what would be. However, Kendrick had just brought an issue up for those with authority to lose, that they previously bore zero anticipations of meeting. The requesting of pieces of media captured by on-duty officer pieces of equipment was the single device that shifted the direction. Before such a moment, Kendrick felt less than simply existing on the outskirts as a member of a youth subset that was brought to a space that bore an abundance of authority. With an assembly of persons in tow, the assembly having possessed previous designs for he whom faced them. Judge Dunham advanced herself slightly, resting her upper appendages that were connected at the elbows. "While we endure an extended wait, Kendrick, I feel the inclination to have you navigate myself and the others within this assembly through an exact account of all moments relevant, including small moments of action and emotion, every moment in detail." Kendrick's aperture experienced feelings that correlated with arid soil and dehydration. Kendrick offered a gesture of acknowledgement to the inquiry, as was Knight, that of he being arrested. Kendrick embarked his telling, that of the details of his arrest, with a volume that possessed an unwavering tone. "I travelled homeward. I did not travel in a sprint, nor either did I do it with over-the-shoulder looks for the approach of any person. The officers of authority were invisible to my own person from a point that had previously been held, that of those officers in my posterior." Kendrick paused. His superior had been an active figure, performing a visual survey of he, although Kendrick, despite such, took measures to actively disengage any contact that was visual to his own person. The vehicles that they utilized approached in quickened spurts to a halt. From the officer who was on duty, utterances were made, those that bore relevance to that of direction, of intent, and also for material possession. Kendrick's own hand took measures to enter its zone of conjunction with his opposing portion of upper appendage. I stated that the authority figures possessed what to claim as their own: nothing. The youth, whom possessed the name Kendrick, gave an acknowledgement of such a prior occasion. This took place during a session inside the room. As an additional element to it all, from such a moment that included the prior moments in question, the higher members of legal authority brought forward expressions that bore negative implications. Those prior elements caused the superior member with legal and social and lawful powers to interject, with an audible expression that served an audible warning. Prior to what has been mentioned, to have legal powers, legal and moral and truthful high ground had previously restricted the advance to the stage of an advancement of force, to have legal high ground in a scenario that involved another's existence. What the young man spoke now was the detail that bore the negative implication, and thus brought that high-power moment to bear itself as action in full to the real existence of the moment. Kendrick pressed onward. The moment that bore the highest weight was the moment in the scenario that Callowell, the authority of upper power, took measures that involved the clutch of mine of what I claim as mine, and always will, as such, is a right. Kendrick took a prior moment from what was his that existed previously in sequence to explain. I, by response, took to the pull and tug of my own arm, only to have action taken for my person to become one with the rough, crude and sharp construction of material, brick. That substance acted as a support system and a surface that forced mine, a lesser person, to be trapped from all directions, save that of what the ground claimed as space. Kendrick then shared that the authority that spoke those very words, that of Denton, explained as such to take measures as resistance of any of his own action. I spoke and pressed to tell that there was nothing that took place with any of my own action, save for what may be claimed as self-preservation. Regardless, all moments went deaf, and what followed was the force of a punch, to a region that belonged to what I claim as the rib and an area that surrounded the zone. The young man, whom was in contact with the seat, shifted ever so gently. That night, that region became injured and hurt, both to touch and from the inside of my mind. When I took in spurts of gasps, those who bore legal power took part in expressions that bore negative light, yet nothing took place to aid me in a capacity of compassion. Those enforcers, with power, and of a state of high authority, claimed for my person to be grateful for the reason of their better mood. Kendrick's sight then made contact with Callowell to claim an instance of connection that did previously was void of existence. The official member that bore the responsibility and force to judge a situation, Dunham, investigated Callowell. With a description of the same, the scene and the moment, to have legal power and a high position, an inquiry was made of Callowell. Officer Callowell, did your person make active use of the apparatus and its function for pieces of media integration during that day, while you existed and made action in such an incident? With the atmosphere of a dry desert, Callowell expressed from inside an expression that held zero exposure of inner thought. It serves as typical and standard for the application for use with apparatuses that include pieces of media for occasions and scenarios that involves direct contact with the public and/or a member of. With sharpened senses, the woman Dunham claimed that the inquiry that has been answered was not that of the first moment the inquiry was made. The team of legal experts, those that served to defend the same Callowell, sat at full forward. That of high status, with legal power. Such is our own opinion for lack of any approval to answer moments and questions from the authority figure, Dunham, and to be put forth by any and all parties involved until after an active moment that holds its place to include careful, first-hand investigation of integrated pieces of media. As an obvious and apparent response, the experts with experience did so, for those prior figures with expertise knew the potential results, or lack of any substance, that were to come. As per Kendrick, he felt the pulse of his heart to be a point that involved high volume. The scenario involved with the moment was, he now had an approach to cease and let run an inactive moment that was a burying of what rings as factual from existence, as those figures with power do, with a tendency to proceed or stay, with a breath, and with forced and maintained tone. The authority member Dunham has been communicated to in explanation of fact for any person. Dunham made contact with those officers and higher officials, where the request bore a sense of a deep importance. It was of those moments where the apparatus bearing capture abilities, with the moment those officers bearing it, those pieces are no more. Hollowell, in response, provided that the authority of legal right bore pieces of the expression for contact and alignment, that of a deep sense. They possessed something of an investigation. The official member that bore the responsibility and force to judge a situation, Dunham, from moments contained inside the memory, such with moments where it felt just for his person, the authority official has taken measures to shut apparatus function down. Hollowell made contact for visual connection with that youth. The visual, and more of hers, was on the attempt for a moment of high weight for any expression to come. Judge Dunham then had an investigation for that expression to be read from those with more force and ability, and turned her gaze ever so slightly to a moment of deep thought. That with moments contained in a past existence, if a deep and personal emotion must be spoken, express what it is by any means you hold possible. Kendrick had a recollection for that moment, the components to make a wall and the weight of a boot from the moment of my collapse. A smile for any second that a gasp was made for an area of my being that was the inner or out. With a conclusion, Kendrick expressed to Dunham a moment of full direct contact. In short, all components have been expressed. In response, there was an absence of any kind from anything or any person. The chamber, and whatever it bore in substance, was on full alert. Only any party possessed their own means of taking action. Then was action and sound expressed from legal authority. That official with power did express those words with a clear point of origination. How long must we force the parties to bear before our pieces may take presence to the assembly and those who bear their positions with us? Then there was a figure from Hollowell's corner whom used a computer to connect in her inquiry, whispering in her ear with an expression that was quick, a quick moment to make a statement. Hollowell responded after those moments, shifting the expression on her face, then made contact with Dunham. Authority with the power to make your own decisions, that of that device, bore negative function for some time prior to my entrance. At some duration in the past, the pieces bore the sign for what we may claim as death, Hollowell had said. To those words, they did travel to those with position from within the chamber. As for Kendrick, his person let a moment for expiration travel through with negativity. Those details, for those of what has been and will be, rang factual. Sensing the moment was approaching to a high weight, the members whom possessed the legal rights and responsibilities moved the frame on his glasses. With all factors in mind, the verbal moments from an inexperienced party of minors must be dismissed and zeroed for the record in its existence. Kendrick had all that he could withstand. At a quick burst, he was at a higher volume. Those whom bear legal and moral high ground are required to not only glance toward me, but to ingest my full presence. The attorney official with legal power, of all whom have spoken from within with experience, moved the form on his visual piece of glass and frames. With visual force, Dunham moved a gaze that bore authority to all that existed in a forceful measure. This power, put for a claim for a visual example, had those persons not dare to communicate a moment further. Then Dunham moved to the member who had been trapped in his experiences, where it became required that Hollowell was to express herself. After the moment, those to follow came from her corner and did so with her for action in legal rights. We shall, per action and rights, put forward and in writing a command for review. We would request and require that the legal force we hold power in be expressed with legal action of full measure. This was taken by members whom looked on with what was expression of doubt. The pieces, with the moment that was factual, had been spoken. What was the next of action? Judge Dunham took to a moment of contact with the pieces of her finger. To the beat of rhythm, the force of Hollowell was taken to a seat, by her with force. From action she made to that, all, from my position in force for legal rights, would do to bear our claim for authority. Did members from high importance to the side to legal measure take any pieces, made documentation for the physical well-being of body and mind? Again, Dunham had to express the moment for influence over those with the inclination. She required herself to go back to the members of legal authority, something that had the capacity to hold legal rights. In return, what came was a head to be shaken with a level of force. It was the same from any and all members. There was never, in any way, a question made from legal force, or those holding legal power, for an incident that had taken place. Never from law or a member of force did any hold concern. As a reaction, the authority judge spoke to the room in an audible tone, with slow measure, with power, and with rhythm. With a touch, she made a claim on her pieces from before. It would require for action to be taken for my position and power. A member of the order with duty, legal standing, and a badge will have the claim and the ability to be investigated for actions that were performed by the legal code in all legal right. We claim for that moment, with any and all legality, as such that has been written, the moment that has now come. To that came breath from the youth. Previously the officer had possessed so little to do, while the scales and balance for any force was completely on his own. He knew, however, that what existed in factual standing was making its approach for that power. After all, his previous actions had been put to question and full display. At this moment, what was in the room had shifted, for previously a child had existed as a trapped factor in the balance. Before the change, that member had not yet gained any experience for the legal system. But now, and finally, the official did use a stylus against a surface, drawing attention. The chamber, from this moment, will go into recess. The length to what the break is must be in use for use from legal experts. The measure of how it came is just one piece to a puzzle. With a final and forceful breath, to put claim on the moment, with respect that was due, was what those words have drawn. After, with a brief pause for air and legal rights, the official turned to Kendrick. To do so as she did came as a moment where the officer was spoken to. Your person may move far and out of what we hold here. There did come a moment for thought. Previously those forces bore complete control of the situation at all times. Then, to leave, with the thought that existed, he took those steps to those whom was at duty to be his member in the equation. While that moment took to action, that official stood stock still and put forth no moment more than the seconds it took. A thought. Those men bore the authority and the power. If it was the case for a ruling in his benefit that those members will find themselves in the action for imprisonment, it would bear more. In a world of legal right, protections will forever fall for those. Even after what has been, Kendrick did require a moment to breathe that thought. With those concepts in mind, the actions will take hold to the officer that had his name. He was required to follow all, and with a silent expression, that of no words or emotion for display, he made it clear with legal intent that the actions had been had by force on himself. He had his eyes, always. The legal figure gave an expression to signal their recess. The chamber broke out in all, those whom took to stands to make measures. Moments to rest were given to the parts and pieces. Those legal members, high in ranking, moved from the area with action. Those that stood remained for duty. After that event, Miss Lowry placed a hand to the miner. "With comfort to what you have known, what is your condition?" the member said. And while that moment may ring a sense of personal intent and compassion, there was not an expression that could possibly fulfill what those questions were or ever will to mean. It had come that action for the officer existed. However, those with power and an upper hand did not bear expression that connected, as to do so would open to all of the force that it bore. So the moment was lost, for a lack to show intent. The prior and high-ranking members, with legal claim to the pieces, had gathered close for talk, to share their thoughts and intents. The member that rang loudest among those in authority had an eye on Callowell as she went to and left that corner. Dunham was also present to express intent that made all to fall. That was in and all in the vicinity, to total silence. With that moment in existence, we draw the action for us to be in position to start on. The leader and controller of it all expressed. Hollowell stood, in a volume that was both in range and forceful enough to be for all to register as fact. From all of what has since come, we make a recommendation for dismissal on all accounts. The air in the room took to shock and volume. Stillness struck at an instant to what had occurred previously, but made for there not to be a member who moved with anything more than the bare capacity to keep balance. Even the officer, whom the youth had spoken against, stood firm in place to take an account of all that took action. The judge, with control and force of the chamber and court, turned to the miner in question to give him expression of acknowledgement. It bore 0 for the intent to be made by all those whom was in attendance of that moment. Kendrick, it could be felt for what may require to touch for closure. The officer, not from the legal corner, still bears all intent of the day. And as so, to those final words, the mouth of the authority official still did travel, and to those actions the officer did bear no intent. What all has been was nothing short of an instance with legal requirements. To what was, has never bore any action that makes light of intent, but always makes great the truth, and law, and the code of what we hold. So it did remain as it was, with that expression to the words that closed it, no different to start. With all action in a sense of the requirement, Dunham asked, "Is there anything the man, the officer, that is accused of crimes may express as final?" Callowell for a second has paused himself, a short brief of what was but a small instant. Hollowell was quick to make his point as to what to do or never do, and he paid close attention to what it bore. In the same manner, his intent was kept for just those he deemed important to receive, to not open himself any more to risk, his only action from action. This made legal claim over by Dunham, putting the moment for action to rest at last by the law and all legal standings. With the words left unspoken, it was over. After the event she spoke. With legal authority, from all powers and knowledge, this trial is now required to come to a pause. The sound that marks a claim on the moment with force echoed. As the moment took course from there, a buzz of existence began to take shape with the sounds of higher power. From there, Kendrick took action by making an action back for a second. To his vision, he took measures to see the officer. From what all was shown, he remained on his 2 feet to make his own measures, whatever those turned out to be. With the lack of expression, however, or any to exist previously, it was made clear to what he felt. He moved forward, with the assumption it made him more powerful. His hand moved to his shoulder for comfort and a form of security. "I think, at last, we may find a new home." With action in thought, the youth turned attention to what it was like on the force of duty to Callowell. With that expression, or again, the lack, it became all too clear to what the events will turn out. You aren't free. Not now in your position. The expression came to the forefront. With the weight of the chamber, the youth was in his position to be with comfort in a system that never held the potential to do right by his kind. He had, by all means, been seen for far, far more than what his action was. From a race to a family status, 0 of his character truly mattered, and yet the victory was here. It possessed the capability to make the world turn in all things that involved him, and finally, it wasn't just him. With intent to make what had been, he took those strides to the door, and for what waited outside. A member, just to be sure, took a visual and active assessment to what had occurred, clicked to what now rung with life. All were there to express what had been, the expressions of their own, all the same, all for the intent to make more than themselves in the grand system of time and law. The system, in final thought, did have an intent to do bad by ones as that of his being, but for some force that changed today. And for any of those that bear stories like these to hear, all that is taken should never be in doubt. It all bears more than meets the common intent, and must never go quiet. Be one with this expression, and to each and all who hold that the pieces for action and time are held in wait, the silence is the greatest threat to any and all, and must never take lead. Stories similar to Kendrick's require acknowledgement. Sharing through this medium is an act of amplifying those unheard voices. The truth sometimes bears greater strength than any physical or legal force,